So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about lighting, but before I do, I want to get my snowman to rest on some kind of a plane, some kind of ground plane, so it doesn't look so ambiguous here in the space. Now remember, we can click on this first render button to get a real quick scene preview. We can get a temporary render of our perspective viewport. Now you can also hold down the command key and press R to get a quick render, and I'll be doing that from now on. Now, in order to get a better sense of what's going on with the lighting inside my environment, I'm going to want to introduce a ground plane. And I'm going to do that simply with just a cube object. And I'm going to take the cube and I'm going to grab the little vertical control point here along the y-axis, that little orange dot, and that'll allow me to quickly and easily scale the height down. I'll also drag the sides out. So I just, again, want to get a surface, and maybe I'll key in some values here. I'll go out to 2000 along the X and 2000 along the Z. And now I have a surface that the snowman is sitting on. And again, this is just a temporary surface just to get a sense of how the lights are going to interact with the scene. So once I start getting some shadows, I want a surface for the ground shadow to fall upon. I'll give that a quick render, and already I can see that it looks a little less ambiguous than it did before. Now, I want to introduce a light into the scene, and by default Cinema 4D has its default lighting turned on. These are really simple lights that don't cast shadows. They're just kind of a simple modeling light that's always in the scene. And the minute that we go up under the light menu and introduce a new light, and for now I'm just going to select this first object that says light, you can see that our light dramatically changes. And just like any other object, our light is created at 0, 0, 0. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift this light straight up in the air. So I'm moving it up along the y-axis, and I'm going to move it over along the x-axis. And so I'm just going to change my view a little bit here. I'm going to orbit. Maybe I'll zoom out just a little bit, and I'll orbit again, just so I have a slightly different view. So I move it up, off to the side, and I'm going to move it more towards the foreground. Okay, so if I look at this from a top-down view, you can see that my light is kind of in front of the object, but up and off to one side. Now, with that light that I just introduced, and I'll just give it a quick render, you can see that things are starting to look a little bit more modeled. There's a bright side and a dark side to the object. The light's pretty intense, and I can start to modify some of the light properties by selecting the light and looking in the Attributes Manager. Now, I mentioned before that when you look inside the Attributes Manager, there's going to be a number of tabs that show up for all the different kinds of objects. So when we select the cube and we look at the object attributes, we can see that we can govern its size here. If we select the light, you can see there's a lot more options that are available, and there's a lot more tabs that are available. I want to stay focused on the general lighting tab, and this is the place where I can select things like the color of my light. So if I want to add a little bit of blue to my light, I can do that, and immediately you see my scene update. In addition to that, I can adjust the intensity. So it's from 0 to 100%. And just about any time in Cinema 4D when you see this slider bar, you can click and drag on the slider to manipulate it. In addition to that, you can always actually go over 100%, but you have to key in the values in order to do that. Now, I don't want my light so intense, so I'll bring it down to about 90 or 80%, something like that. And that starts to look okay. I'll give that a quick render, and you can see that I have a very different light setup now inside my scene. It's just one single light, but even though I'm getting some modeling on my object, so in other words, there's a dark side and a light side to my object, I'm not getting any cast shadows. Okay, so I see a dark side of the object, a light side of the object, but if there were an intense light source up here, I'd expect a shadow to be cast across the floor here. Well, it's by no accident that Cinema 4D keeps its shadows turned off. And the idea here is that when we introduce a light, we want to go down into the General tab and choose what kind of shadow we want to cast. There's a shadow pull-down menu, and I'll just choose from this list. There's shadow maps, ray traced, and area, and I'm going to choose the first option, which is shadow maps, or shadow maps soft. And I'll just orbit back around here a bit. And I'll hit Command R again and render. And immediately now you see that I'm getting some cast shadows inside my scene. So all of a sudden my scene is starting to look much better with one simple light inside the environment. Now, if I want to control the shadow, or at least how far it's being cast, I need to think about where the light is relative to my snowman. There's a real basic 3-point lighting strategy that we could use. 3-point lighting strategies are pretty typical for getting a standard light set up for either studio photography, for digital video, and for 3D modeling. And the basic strategy for a 3-point light goes something like this. I'm going to select my light. I'm going to move it up and off to one side. So right now I'm in front of this object. I'm in front of my snowman. I'll just orbit around a little bit here and select my light again. Okay, so I'm up above the snowman, I'm out in front, and I'm off to one side. Okay, this is the most important light inside my scene. This is the key light. And the key light is the light that's intended to emulate the sun or the moon or whatever the most intense light source in a scene is. So I'm going to name it that. I'm going to call it key light. And a key light often needs to be very intense. Depending on the mood you're trying to set, you want it up and away. The next light, and I'll just render this to demonstrate this point, with a single light inside of our scene, we have, sort of this flaw going on, which is that we're getting a lot of modeling of our subject. Let me zoom in so we can see this. We get a lot of dramatic light. There's a lot of modeling here. So we have a bright side and we have a dark side that's starting to look very 3D. But the downside is that on the dark side of my snowman here, it blends in with the shadow, and I have no visual information on the back side of this snowman. In fact, when I look in the black background, there's absence of space here, and that starts to blend directly into my snowman. Now I get a sense for what's going on here, but I really want a second light source to help fill in some of this shadow. And so our second light is going to be a fill light. I'm going to use the same kind of light. I'll click and hold, and I'll just choose light. And this light that I'm using is an omni-light or an omnidirectional light. And this works just like a light bulb. It casts light in 6 different directions. So it's positive Y and negative Y, positive X and negative X, and positive and negative Z. So it's casting light along 6 different axes from a single point in the room. Now, I'm going to move that just out in front of the object. Now, this light for a fill light is way too intense. I'm going to bring that way down to like 20, 25, maybe 30%. And now when I render, now you can see that I'm starting to see the information on the back side of my snowman. So I have my key light that's up in the air that's casting across this snowman. And then I have my fill light, which is filling back in some of the dark spots. So that's the basic strategy, 2 points of a 3-point light system. We're not going to use the third point just yet. I'll talk about that as we push forward in the presentation.